Hey, there's people clapping. Whoa. Whoa.
It's like we have an audience.
It's amazing. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. I'm Matt Dillahunty, joined this week, Phil Session.
Hey, how are you?
The world's greatest volunteer.
Whoa.
Well, all right. I'll prove it. What'd you do today, Phil?
Held the Austin Atheist Open the Homeless giveaway in
That's
downtown.
right. And what'd you do last night, Phil?
I was here with many other people. Let me not stress this enough. The volunteers that came out today and yesterday, almost 19 other people here yesterday to help pack and sort items here on my birthday. As a matter of fact, got a cake.
Yeah, on your birthday. On your birthday, you were preparing for today's giveaway. Have you also been helping register people to vote?
We actually did.
Oh, yeah. When's the last time you built a ramp?
Was it a week?
A week ago.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, the world's greatest volunteer.
Something like that.
Well, happy belated birthday. I'm so glad we get to do the show this week. We are here at the Atheist Community of Austin. We're sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state. You can find out more about the ACA at atheist-community.org. We'll skip past the regular announcement stuff. Do you have things that we need to announce real quick?
Yes.
Let's do it.
And so I will put this out there it's actually going to be on next week on the 14th, right after the Atheist Experience goes on. It's going to be the live premiere of Truth Wanted, which is a new show that's being produced out of the Atheist Community of Austin. So you can look forward to that right after this show ends, or very close.
Next week.
This is on next week after the show.
So this is something that I'm going to keep kind of hitting home about, because for years it was, the Atheist Experience and then and nonprofits, and then we added in godless bitches, and then came like Talk Heathen and Preaching Humanist and secular parenting and secular sexuality and all of these things. Basically, what the ACA is doing, as I pointed out previously, is building an actual fucking network to deal with the entire person. So it's not just about arguing about God or whatever. That way when we get calls in with people looking for advice, we may actually have resources in-house that we can direct people to say, you know what, we love your call. But if you call into the Atheist Experience to tell us how cool you thought the Atheist Experience was, maybe there's a show where it's better for you to visit that way. And so as they continue building these up, today's going to be a normal show. We'll probably run a little long. We'll probably do some kind of after show. Next Sunday, we'll try to finish exactly on time so that Truth Wanted can premiere. Mm-hmm. And then I think that's how we're basically going to kind of keep this trend going. Every time we've got a new offering, we're going to probably bring it in on Sunday and kind of roll over audiences that way, build a network. You got new content coming all the time from a great many people, all of whom were eager to participate in what I would say is newly revitalized Atheist Community of Austin. There's people sitting out there clapping and cheering, and we're doing good stuff. There was some kind of pasta plate selling thing today, but we no longer go out to dinner after the show, and that's the thing that I wanted to remind people.
Which is
we do the show here at the ACA Library, the ACA Free Thought Library, 1507 West Koenig Lane. And if you want to come down and watch the show, you can do that, just like the people on the other side of the glass now. If you want to come down and hang out, the building is open 7 days a week from 10 in the morning till 9 p.m. And after the show's over today, we'll be sitting around talking, who knows, perhaps arguing, maybe laughing, telling jokes, eating pasta, and doing fun stuff. It's what we do.
Yeah. And to go on your point of the amount of shows that are out there and so much different content that's being produced. Like, there's a lot of people that call the shows that have questions about, how to raise their children, or dealing with marriages when you have multiple, you have partners that have differing religious beliefs, and how that effect has. But we have a show that encompasses, that may be better equipped to suit those questions, Parenting Beyond Belief.
Yes, I said secular parenting. I meant Parenting Beyond Belief.
Yeah, so that's one of our shows here. So that's something that you can also call into to kind of explore those topics, and not necessarily be usually we're on the time constraints. We're trying to get to a lot of calls here on the show, but they may be able to take a little more time and delve further into those problems and use their own experience of the host on that show to really expound on that. And so there's a lot of content that's out there. So you just find your fill out there, that's for sure. But as always, there's no I haven't scheduled any other volunteer events here in Austin this month. I'm not sure if I'm going to, because of the Halloween on the very end. I wasn't sure if I was going to do that or not. But I did want to give a shout out to all the people, as I mentioned earlier, that came out to volunteer yesterday. I had no idea that there would be that many people that actually showed up. I figured it was going to last maybe an hour and a half. It took maybe 30 minutes at the most. And we were done, and we just kind of chilled out, ate cake, and kind of hung out a little bit before people headed on out. But today at the giveaway, we had 35 volunteers total that came out, and so it was a massive turnout. We served 235 people or so out there on today, and it was just amazing. But we've never had that many volunteers, some of which actually came to the packing and sorting as well and made their way over there as well. And it was maybe 33% was their first time ever going to one of those. And so they were just like, I'm not sure what to do. And so we're calming them down. Okay, just get your hands in the bin, set the children up, and this is how we do things. And so it was an awesome time.
This is how we do it.
Y'all missed it before this show started.
Yeah.
All of the.
I was losing my mind.
If you were live in the studio audience, you would have caught all of the shenanigans.
I can do T Swift and Eminem
that happened
Take
prior
some of
to this show.
So quick question. On those Sunday mornings, I've gone out on occasion with Humanists at Work, Atheist Helping Homeless. But there's also a bunch of church groups that are out there as well.
Yes, there are.
And a lot of them are doing great work. There's things I learned from some of them. There was one of the ministries specifically focused on giving people pedicures, because if you're homeless, your feet, and I thought it was great that they actually took a scientific fact of what people needed that they may not be aware of what they needed and went with it. How many volunteers do they have on average?
Maybe it's maybe between 8 to 10 or something. There's
something
along those lines.
Did we have more volunteers than any of the other religious organizations that were out there? Is that the case?
I don't know about that.
Maybe.
We were pretty up there.
It's an entirely irrelevant point, but I asked the question specifically because people are often surprised. I remember when Joe Zemecki and others started doing this.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first questions everybody got was, well, which church are you with? And the standing joke was, we're not with the church. We just wanted you to have a sandwich without having to listen to a sermon too. We were here to feed you. I realize that, they're trying to feed other parts of you that they think are real.
Sure.
So it doesn't matter. But one of the things that's important is to note that, yes, in fact, there are charity efforts in the secular community.
Oh, yeah.
We haven't had the privileged position that churches have had to, for centuries now, to build up. But we are building, and there's more and more people getting involved, and you can get involved too. And you can just contact Phil because he knows everything about all this stuff.
Oh yeah, all those events, everything that we do here, all of the shows, all of the volunteer events, whether it's last minute or we plan, 4 weeks ahead, will always be posted on Facebook or Meetup to make sure that everyone is as well informed as they can be and can participate when they can, because not everyone can make it out to all events. There's too much stuff that's happening to expect.
That's true across the board. I mean, there are conventions that I didn't like. There's a convention I would have gone to that I didn't hear about until just the other day. Mm-hmm. And so there's so much stuff going on, both with regard to charitable efforts and community service efforts and just broader community efforts, and you can't possibly keep up with all of it. The best thing you can do is be connected with communities in your area and with the Atheist Community of Austin. Get connected with some national groups on social media so that you can at least have the best chance to be as informed as possible about what's going on.
Yeah.
But I think one of the best things you can actually do is not just sit back at home and interact on social media, but come down to the building or come down and meet up with other people, because that connection makes sure that now you have a chance to get the information that they got that you didn't get.
Yeah, y'all missed it.
I showed up yesterday just because, and there was volunteer work to be done here.
Yeah, that was random. You just randomly showed up, and there
although to be fair, I did not participate in the volunteer work because something else came up, but I would have.
He was there right before things started, and then had to scoot out.
Anyway, let's stop talking about how lazy I am, and we'll get on to some calls.
Sure, let's do it.
So we've got Adele in Oakland who helped us out before the show to make sure the phones were working. We'll assume they still are. How are you, Adele?
Doing well. How are you guys doing?
Doing well, Adele.
Not bad at all.
Well, first, before I get to my question, I just really wanted to thank everybody at the Atheist Experience for what you do and having these discussions, because I think it's really important. And I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So my question is, during a discussion with Christians, it could be any theist, but particularly for this example, Christians, I get to a point, or they get to a point where they don't know how to defend their logic.
Mm-hmm.
So they say something to the effect of, well, God's ways are higher than ours.
Yeah, how do they know that?
They'll answer a question. Right, well, how do they know that? Right, but I don't know a way to refute that doesn't make it seem like I'm attacking them, because then the discussion at that point would just end, and that's not what I want.
Yeah. I don't know that I have a good answer that'll keep it from, I mean, you can't do anything if somebody feels attacked. It's in some sense, it's understandable. I mean, these are issues that they take to heart. And in some senses, it's ridiculous because, why would you need to feel offended or hurt on behalf of God? How could I possibly wound a God? And why isn't your God giving you better ammunition for these conversations? I think maybe you should take it up with him. But when they say something like, God's ways are higher than our ways, well, they might as well just say, well, I'm right. They're functionally the same. Yeah. They're just saying, this is what I think about God, and when pressed on it, I'm just going to reassert that God's way is correct. And you can ask them, how do you know that, or why do you believe that? But at the end of the day, they're just saying that they're right, and they're not demonstrating it.
Well, then at that point, I bring up the idea of, okay, well, you say it's a personal experience with God, that's just how you know. Mm-hmm. You know his ways are higher than ours, and it's something you just have to experience personally.
Yeah.
And I can, at that point, get them to even agree that somebody from a different religion feels the exact same way.
Right.
But at that point, they just still think they're right, and you can't get past that.
Okay, one of the questions I think you could ask, because so far as I can tell, you're doing it exactly the way I would, or the way I would think would be right.
Yeah. It was my next question for sure to ask about someone else that feels the same way.
Exactly. And so then the question I would go to after that is, when you tell me these things, do you think that I should be convinced based on you saying them? Because
that's a good, okay.
If this is a personal thing to them, they may not be in any position to say, this is what I believe, and you should believe it too. If instead they're just wanting to tell you what they believe, that's not a conversation. That's not a dialogue. It's not a discussion. It's just, here's what I believe. If they can't do the why, and more importantly, not only why do they believe, but why should other people believe, then maybe there's not much benefit to that conversation about that specific topic, and instead the conversation needs to shift to, okay, you believe something, I believe something. I think that what I believe is an accurate representation of the reality we both share. So ideally, if we were both being rational, we would agree. We don't agree. And so I'm willing to try to convince you of why I'm convinced. I would like to think that for most of the things that I believe, they should be demonstrable. That is, if I believe, climate change is happening, and here's my reasons for thinking it's happening, here's my reasons for what I think the causes are, that's something I could demonstrate. Outside of this God claim, do we ever run across very many people who are saying things like, here's what I believe and I have no interest in demonstrating it, or this notion of, here's what I believe, but I'm not going to bother to tell you why, and I really don't care if you believe in it, and this conversation is kind of, we just don't do that. And at no point...
They think they're in the position where they don't have to demonstrate it.
Well, that's the other thing, is when we talk about, hey, income inequality, do we just say, I'm convinced that there's income inequality because I'm convinced of it? And then expect people to agree? I mean, we don't use that type of thing in any sort of other discussion. We can disagree about the reliability of data or the sources. We can disagree about the extent to which something is a problem. But we don't tend to say, I hope, this is what I believe. You should probably believe it too. I really wish you would, but I'm not going to bother to present any evidence or argument or whatever.
Yeah,
you're absolutely correct. Bringing up the real world examples when you're trying to have a rational argument, but it always comes back to, well, they can somehow see the real world examples and agree that logic shouldn't be used to come to conclusions for those things. But in the end, when you try to apply that to their reasoning for belief in God or something in the Bible, it always comes back to, well, his ways are higher than ours. And so they can't seem to apply the logic to everyday life to their belief.
Well, another kind of a piece of that, you were talking earlier about how they came to this belief because they had an experience, their own personal experience, and they weren't necessarily interested in convincing you, and they may understand that may not convince you, but they are convinced because it's a personal experience. But my question to them would be, well, how reliable is that for figuring out what's actually true, what's actually representative of reality? Because if they had that experience and they take that as true. So their belief and their deity, their specific one, whatever denomination, if they adhere to one, this is true. But then someone else comes on with a completely different belief. They have their own experience. And so they believe what they have is true. Is that really the most reliable method that they have to figure out what is true? Because if two differing religious individuals are coming to their own conclusions and they are not compatible with each other, these religions are not compatible with each other, how do we go about figuring out which one of y'all actually has it correct? What method can we use to start getting into, well, which one of you have it right? What else can we do? Because your experience was obviously not enough, because y'all both had an experience and arrived at this conclusion that you're both true.
There's another way to get them to recognize that what they're saying is essentially useless, and that is, how would you feel if I told you that I'm convinced that my ways are higher than God's ways?
Exactly. And I have the same amount of evidence and the same line of thinking, but they always say, well, I just know.
Okay.
And that's good enough for them. And I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't know how I use those examples. And they can even agree with the example of somebody else can arrive to their own truth through the same line of thinking. And they just say, well, I know it's true.
Yep. This is why I talk about beliefs don't live in a vacuum. The process by which you reach a conclusion can inform other conclusions. And somewhere in their brain is something that they are either fundamentally convinced must be the case for reasons that they are convinced are good, or they are, in some cases, convinced that it's beneficial and wise for them to say that they believe that it must be the case. And so there's a roadblock there, and the conversation you're currently having may have nothing to do with that thing that is blocking them from realizing that they have a flawed premise in their head.
Okay.
And so this is one of the things, if you're not making progress in one area, you take a step back and you go, okay, let's have a conversation about truth. Do you care about truth, or are you more concerned with, whether an idea is comfortable, whether it's popular, whether it feels right? How would we go about? Is there some, to go with John Loftus's outsider test for faith, is there something that we could do to show that your understanding of your experience or your belief is actually true rather than just individually accepted as true? And I found, there's a guy I did a discussion with Ravi Zacharias Ministries on Monday. I'm hoping to get the video of that up soon. And there are definitely things that he and I agree upon. I mean, we agree that we share a reality. It may be the case that you have to start there. It may be the case that you have to say, okay, do we agree that we share a reality? Because if we don't, I don't know where to go from that point. But if we do, then we should be able to agree step by step towards reaching some conclusion. It's really, you're forced to do all the work that we've done in epistemology over thousands of years, where we would normally try to ride on the shoulders of the people who came before us. In some cases, you can't do that. You need to say, okay, Phil, you and I agree that we share a reality. Let's pick something else that we think is true, that we're both convinced is true, like that's a coffee cup. And talk about how we got to the point where we can agree that that's a coffee cup. And then go to another example, and now let's pick something we don't agree on, and we can show that I'm consistent in using this methodology to figure out whether or not something is reasonable to accept, and you have now introduced something new. And if you find the new thing that they've introduced, whether it be personal experience or blah, 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 then it's worthwhile to show that that is unreliable. It doesn't show that they're wrong. This is the thing that we need to drill into people's heads. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that you can't show that you're right, and that you should not base your view on this flawed foundation. It would be the same as if somebody said, I believe God's ways are higher than my ways because I flipped a coin, and heads, God's ways are higher than my ways, and tails, they're not. And so I'm just going to go with the coin toss. And so then you need to show how unreliable a coin toss can be. Would you like your civil liberties to be based on the toss of a coin? I wouldn't.
I totally agree with that example, and that was something that I was thinking about too. If you can just say, because this is how I feel, would you want policy based on that without actual evidence that is based on logic? And I think you brought up a really great point that made me see it from a different perspective, which is it isn't even at the point where they feel that they can convince you that they're right, but they're convinced that the reason they hold the beliefs are because it's good or it's wise, and they might even value truth, and they believe from their perspective that that's why it's okay to say that they believe it without something that would convince somebody else. I don't know if that makes sense, but I thought that was very insightful, and that helped me a lot.
Yeah, best of luck with the conversation. And if you find a way to progress better, if you make progress on this front, by all means, call us back or email TV at Atheist-Community and let us know how it goes, because I've been hosting this show for 14 plus years, and I'm not convinced that I've had loads of conversations like this that don't necessarily get anywhere, and some do. And it's going to come down to the fact that people believe for different reasons, and, different things are going to help people out.
And even if people actually want to have that conversation, because some people don't really want to have that conversation. Just today at the giveaway, I was approached with someone whose tagline was "The truth is God," and that's just what he has. And so we exchanged email addresses because he wanted to talk with me more in depthly. But as I told him, we really didn't get anywhere, because he wasn't really interested in having a conversation at all versus expounding why he's convinced that this is the case. And it was kind of nonsensical, but he wanted to continue the conversation. So we'll see how that goes, but he wasn't interested. I don't have high hopes for the production of that.
God equals truth would totally mess up the math on the meme that I posted the other day, where somebody was like, truth plus God equals life. And then, you can move God over the other side so that truth equals life minus God.
Yeah.
And now if God equals truth, now it's truth plus truth equals life. Or God plus God equals life. God and truth are now equal. It's awful. And that's the thing is, there are ways to be succinct, to turn something into a bumper sticker, to engage in a little bit of poetry or sophistry in a way that appeals to people, and it feels like they've learned something deep and significant and true. And I always go back to the phrase that Dan Dennett taught me, which is a deepity, which is something that appears to be true, but to the extent that it is true, it is trivial, and to the extent that it is significant, it is in fact false. Like love is all you need. That sounds, love is all you need. Love is all we need, Phil. Actually, I need a lot more than love. I need food and oxygen and stuff like that. So to the extent that it's true, it's kind of a trivial thing. And to the extent that it is deep and significant, it's actually false.
I just really appreciate you talking about this, because I think you understand, the point that I'm at, where I don't know how to have the conversation go past where it is. And you made a great point that maybe at this point they're really not interested in having any further discussion or further in their logic, or trying to really validate their claims. They just want to stay within a community that's going to uphold their beliefs no matter what, is just what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's one last thing I'll add on here, and then we're gonna go take some theistic callers who've been waiting, and that's this. The fact that you haven't had success at changing somebody's mind in a discussion doesn't necessarily mean they're closed off. It may be that you're not the one that is going to change their mind, or you're not the one that's going to change their mind today, because the first time we hear something, it's just strange and shrugged off. And the second time we hear it, it's, hey, I think I've heard something like that. And the third time is when you get to a pattern. And if they're still in the mode of, this whole non-belief thing is just weird, then they're not in a position where they can even really begin to process what you're talking about. Or it could be that there's a personality conflict where they're just you're never going to make any progress with them. Somebody else could come along and say the same thing, and because they say it differently, or because they have a mustache,
or how they view the other person they're talking with.
It could be any number of things. Just appearance or whatever. It has more of an impact. Or maybe it's going to be somebody that they care about more. It's like how many anti-marriage equality politicians didn't change their view until somebody in their family came out as gay.
Right, then all of a sudden.
It became personal.
Yeah, you could have argued with them forever and not changed their mind, and then when it became personal. And this is why, even though I don't tend to use the problem of evil as an argument against God, because I think there are some responses to it, I understand that many people do, and it's very impactful, because as soon as you start talking, to a parent who's lost a child, for example, and asking how that could happen in a world with the type of God that they believe in, that can be hugely significant. Whereas for me, when I was a believer, that would have had no bearing at all, because I understood and accepted particular apologetics, and I hadn't had a child die.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just brought that down to the, to the bottom, but I appreciate the call, Adele, and let us know how it goes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks. It's the conversations are difficult.
Yeah, they can be. They really can be. And as you were saying, like, even though in this case Adele, she may not be the one to actually get them to realize what goes on. Maybe they may come across this show later on and us discussing about this, or hear it from somebody else that maybe there was a seed that was planted, or at least they can acknowledge that someone else is able to live their life without a deity and still be just fine and still be a productive member of society. And you've shown them that you can be that. And so maybe down the line things will change. But
I think it's an issue that needs to be attacked and addressed on all fronts, which is why the charity efforts are one thing, because it changes people's perceptions of non-believers.
Sure.
Having different programs and different hosts on the programs. I mean, you and I have different styles at this, and Talk Heathen feels different from Atheist Experience, except when I'm on it, evidently. and then it feels like we've got an extended Atheist Experience because I'm just going to do what I do. But that's the thing is, I think that if you don't have to remain calm all the time. You don't have to show no emotion. You also don't have to go into a rant at the drop of a hat, says the guy who has frequently ranted. I think that there are many different approaches because people believe for different reasons, and they're going to find their way out for different reasons, and some of them aren't going to find their way out at all. And that's frustrating because these are people that we care about, people that we know are not idiots. I mean, these are reasonable, intelligent people who have, for some reason or another, a belief that doesn't seem to be justified from our view, that they don't seem to be able to demonstrate. But we'll see how that goes. We got more callers on the line. Isaiah in Oklahoma, how are you?
Oh, I'm first? Oh, damn.
You're second,
you're
actually.
Second, but
well, I'm first among the believers.
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it was fine. Okay. Well, how are y'all doing today?
Doing well.
Not bad.
I'm doing the same. Okay, just a disclosure. I don't expect to convince anyone of anything today. Just want to throw that out right now.
Do you expect to convince me that you don't expect to convince me of anything? I'm sorry. That was a philosophy nerd joke.
I'm not very good at philosophy, so that went over my head, admittedly.
Well, depending on who you talk to, neither am I.
All right, but I don't expect to convince anyone of anything, but at the very least, I hope to entertain you guys. At the very most, I hope to give you something to think about when you're on the toilet.
Okay.
All right. A little too late for that,
right.
But it's fine. It's fine.
So, I was told by what's the name of the lady who takes the calls?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, the call screener.
I'm not necessarily sure who wants their name out and who doesn't, so we'll just go with the call screener.
Yeah,
sure, right. I'm sorry, but anyway, well, she did not seem impressed with me, but that's okay.
Okay.
But,
she's probably just busy, but go ahead.
Yeah, I understand she's doing her job, but anyway, she asked me that. She said that you would probably ask me what I believe in. That would probably be like one of the first things you asked.
Yeah, we tend to want to know what people believe and why, but looking at the call screener's notes here, it seemed that you had a question for us.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, I suppose I could start by answering that question now, since it was probably one that was going to come up.
You're kind of breaking up right now. It's hard to hear you.
I'm sorry. Hang on 1 second. Is that better?
Actually, no.
No,
but
not right now. Keep talking a little bit.
I tell you what, while you might try to reposition or whatever else, the question here that we were told you were going to ask is, if there's a God, would we want to know? Is that
right?
Yeah. Yes. Right. The answer to that question is yes.
Sure.
And then the second question was listed here was, what would a God look like to you? And my answer is, I have no idea.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, I have some minimum thing. Like if you told me, hey, a God exists and it's this coffee cup, I'm going to say, okay, well, now you're kind of playing games with the traditional notion of what a God is. There's some minimum set, but I don't have a full package. I'm willing to go with, you tell me what God you believe in and why you think that God exists, and I can then begin to evaluate whether I agree or disagree.
Okay. Let me rephrase that second question a little bit. When someone brings up when someone brings up the subject of God, like, what's the first thing that would pop into your head? Like, if I ask, what do you think of when you think of Superman? Like, you know immediately what comes to mind.
Yeah.
So I'm asking, like, what would be the first thing that comes to mind when, like, someone mentions God?
So once upon a time, the first thing that would come to mind would have been the God that I believed in when I was a fundamentalist Southern Baptist Christian.
Yeah.
And so it's unavoidable. I mean, when somebody says God, my first instinct is to go with that understanding. However, in the many years that I've been doing this, I've trained myself to not go with my first instinct. And instead, my thought is, okay, what God are they talking about? Because it's a mistake for you to say, hey, I believe in God, and for me to go, oh, well, you must be talking about the God that I used to believe in, and that God's bullshit for this reason or that reason. Instead, I get over what my first instinct is and say, I need you to tell me what God you're talking about. At least, you don't have to give like every detail of God, but I just want to make sure we're roughly on the same page.
Right, because there's a lot of variance out there.
Okay.
People take it like to a spiritual thing to say like, oh, just God is the universe, or God is truth, or something along those lines. That is a far cry away from what I was taught.
Yeah, somebody
what a deity was.
Not too long ago said God is that which is worshipped, which I think is a ridiculous definition, because people are going to worship the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that doesn't make them God in any sense that we would normally talk about in theology and philosophy and things like that.
Right, absolutely. I actually agree with you on all of that.
And quick side note for anybody who thinks I'm actually a sports fan, no, I just watched The Good Place, and that's why Jacksonville Jaguars came to mind. But anyway, go ahead, Isaiah. Your turn.
Such a good show.
Okay, well, what I'm going at here is, and I am admittedly a kind of a slow thinker, so I apologize if it takes me a minute to formulate my thought. But what I'm getting at here is a particular concept, and this concept could be, by some people, perceived as a God, and honestly, that's what I've chosen to do. So, yes, I believe in a God.
Okay. So, what's the concept?
Okay. Well, what I'm talking about is essentially a cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Okay,
I'm convinced. Well, depending on how far you want to extend the cycle analogy, yes, birth, death, life, those things I'm fine with, and I don't think that, depending on how you describe the cycle, I'm not convinced that there is a cycle, because it's not like I'm convinced that my specific cycle, I was born, I lived, I will die. I don't think that is actually cyclical. I don't think I'm going to be reborn. So if you want to extend it that far, you lost me. But I also don't know. I don't think that referring to the birth, life, death cycle, to whatever extent it is a cycle, is anything that I would reasonably consider God in any theological or philosophical sense. It seems more metaphorical.
Right. Sure.
Sure. Now, what I'm getting at is, okay, well, let me basically emphasize on your point. So, basically, from experience, from what a lot of religions basically dictate, a God is someone who is personified as one of us, right? It's basically, someone who's recognizable as like a human being or something like that.
No.
Or it could at least take human shape. No.
Typically, I mean, you could say that they were roughly analogous to us, but what tends to be the case is that we're talking about a super powerful thinking agent. So in the sense that they are a mind of some sort that can have an intentional stance and take action. But most of them don't hold, well, maybe I shouldn't say most. The traditionally most popular gods, for example, the God of classical theology is this omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, blah, blah, blah. And this has been reformulated a bit by theologians and philosophers to avoid some of the problems. But I don't know how many would look at and say God is a man, but that God is an agent. So if that's what you meant, that it's a thinking being, okay, cool.
Okay, yeah, right, like an agent, but in some sense, like a force or a being that could take the form of a human. I would say that's something that a lot of theologies, dictate. How God took the form of Jesus Christ, all that stuff.
Yeah, I would think that certainly if you had a being that was God and you were talking about something that was immensely powerful, that taking the form of a human in some sense would be among its capabilities, right. I guess. Sure.
Right. Now my question is, I've actually once did believe in Christianity. I used to practice it. It didn't leave me fulfilled. You know the story. You've gone through this as well.
I was pretty fulfilled. I just became convinced that it wasn't true. But yeah, go ahead.
True. Right. Okay. But it's like you start asking questions. You're like, if a God is like this, and why would it want to take this particular form? Why would it want to take a form that would be recognizable? Why would it feel the necessity to do that? And I feel like a lot of people we're just, I don't know, maybe we're programmed to personify it as something that we would be comfortable with. Maybe something like let me ask you another question. Do you think that if there were a God, it would be something or something that you would be able to have a conversation with?
Well, I would hope so, because for most of the theological doctrines, God serves as essentially the creator of the universe, and we are his special creation, or that there's some sort of relationship type status there. And it would seem to me very strange if there was a God who couldn't communicate with his creation. It would also when you just look at the powers, if you ascribe God with this massive power, God should be capable of communicating with us.
Right.
Yeah, depending on how that God is defined in general.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about that classical definition, then sure.
Yeah, but it seems we're
I'm sorry, go ahead.
We're kind of, I don't know. I'm not going to be in a position of saying, oh, what you're describing isn't a God. It's just that you seem to be kind of cherry picking particular characteristics that, to some extent,
that is exactly what I'm doing. You are correct.
Okay.
I actually do have some ideas, but
so when you get done picking out all the qualities that you want to attribute to the God that you think is real, then the question becomes, what makes you think that God is real?
Because I can contribute it to things that actually occur in the real world.
Like what?
Okay, well, this is, again, going back to the circle of birth, life, death, and rebirth.
Okay.
Now, okay, just bear with me, because this does go a little bit down a rabbit hole. Because it's something that applies science, but then you got to think about, okay, science, here's my position. I believe that science is the study of, how our world is formed, how our universe works, all of that. Everything that science claims, I believe.
Okay.
But
that's probably a mistake, but I understand what you mean.
Well, you've made the point that science, we only know the universe as science has, as we've studied it, and as science has proven it.
The scientific methods are the single most consistently reliable way to accurately model reality. It doesn't mean we're not going to get it wrong, but yes, go ahead.
Correct. So you would say that science is a good definer of how things happen?
Best we've got.
Okay.
So far.
Now, the question that a lot of people don't ask within the science community, that, well, from what I've noticed, is why do things happen? Like, science is a question of how it shows the process of how things happen, how things are formed, how things are, but we don't really know. We don't really ask the question, or I've never heard of people asking the question of why does this happen?
That's in part because there's a semantic difference where you could reframe any given why question as a how question and vice versa. But what you seem to be getting to is science is addressing the mechanisms by which an event occurred, maybe addressing causal connections, et cetera. but it doesn't address the why in the sense of an intended purpose.
Right.
That's because we have no reason to think that there is an intended purpose.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You'd need to demonstrate an intended purpose. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So that's actually what I'm getting at. This is what the concept that I've been, thinking about.
Cool.
And this is a hypothesis. This is fully a hypothesis.
It may not be. Is it falsifiable?
Okay. Well, it's a theory. Okay.
No. Okay. That's worse.
It's one of those.
It's an idea, perhaps.
Let me just see if I can put it out there for you. Okay. So we look at the world around us, right? We see like everything that happens. We see what we perceive with our eyes, with our ears, with all of our senses. We can see how the process of life works for pretty much everything in the world that we have perceived. We know that animals are born. We know that they live. We know that they die by natural causes or they're eaten by something. We know that plants have a lifespan, some of them longer than ours, some of them shorter than ours. And we know that eventually those die and, grow back, between the seasons. Or I don't know if it's dying or hibernation, but we know that they go into a state of tranquility. Correct?
Okay.
Well,
it's not the word I'd picked, but I'm good with it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Tranquility.
So
need some of that.
We believe we see all these things happen. We know that they happen. We know that they've been happening for as long as our planet has existed and has been able to support life. So we consider this to be an infallible truth, correct?
No.
It's just the reality that we observe around us.
So there is no infallible truth that we're aware of, and science doesn't make proclamations of truth. Science creates models that are the best current descriptions of this. And so science is always, by the way, while there is deductive reasoning involved, it is always an inference. So what you're doing is inferring that because we see this consistency of death, life, et cetera, that this is, when you say this is an infallible truth, if you're implying that this is something that could be universally applied, I don't see any justification for that because that would deny the possibility that we could find out we were wrong about something.
Okay. Yep, you made a good point. Now, and you mean that through scientific study we haven't found anything that would disprove that?
Yeah, it would falsify it. So this notion of falsifiability, which is why I kind of balked at your use of the word hypothesis, is that for something to be properly testable, it needs to be falsifiable, which means there needs to be some way to show that this wouldn't be true. So if you say there are no black swans, that is falsifiable because if you find a black swan, you have just proven that your hypothesis is not true. That's where I'm going. So if you want to begin with a hypothesis that everything that lives eventually dies, I'm fine with that, except it may not be falsifiable because we're not going to, it may be falsifiable in principle because you might be able to find something that does not die. But in practice, it's unfalsifiable because you would have to exist for eternity, which is impossible, to know that it didn't die. Mm-hmm. And so there are various problems here. But I want you to continue because we got other callers and I want to make sure we kind of treat your God hypothesis or concept, idea.
Oh, sure. Okay. I can go into a little bit more detail, but I don't want to waste all of your time. So I could always call back at a later date before we finish up.
Well, I mean, at least give us something that shows how you're going to talk a lot about life, death, and what we know from science. I want to know where this links to a God and what you mean by a God.
Okay. Well, I'm going. I apologize. What I'm getting at here, this concept that I'm going with, is it basically identifies, the cycle itself as, a God, but not a God that falls into the norms that theology, dictates.
Okay.
So let me ask this. There are people who would say the universe is God.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's a reasonable use of the term?
to describe the universe as God?
The universe is God.
No.
Okay.
No.
So because it seems like we're adding something. The universe is the universe. And if we say the universe is God, then we are adding something.
Definition.
And I don't know what that term adds that is true. And I think the same thing applies to this cycle idea that you have. We can refer to the life cycle as just the life cycle. What do we get by also referring to it as God? What does the God label add to it that is accurate?
Well, this is where basically you just have to think outside of the norms of theology. You have to just essentially...
I'm way outside the norms of theology, trust me. I'm asking, if we look at this cycle and we want to say the cycle is God, what is the God label adding that isn't already there in the cycle? And how do you demonstrate that what it is added is true and useful, et cetera?
I don't. I'm equating this cycle to. I'm essentially equating the cycle to God. I'm not essentially adding anything to it.
How is that different from equating the universe with God?
I do not believe that the universe is God. I believe
that doesn't answer the question. So there are people who say the universe is God, and you don't accept that. But you're saying that the cycle is God. And I'm asking, how is that different?
Okay. I believe that the cycle is something that happens throughout the universe. I essentially say that is something that happens, within the boundaries of the universe, and as the universe expands, the cycle expands. That's what I'm saying.
You kind of lost me there a little bit, but even taking the fact that we're observing this life cycle on this planet through science, through the methods and tools of science, and are able to kind of distinguish, the birth phase, the living phase, the death and decay phase, and, being able to observe that cycle. But what Matt is saying is that, saying that is God, that's not adding anything to, what we've observed so far. It's not adding anything to it. So I'm not understanding, what putting God on that cycle that we have observed over time is really doing.
If there had never been a God concept, if religions hadn't existed and nobody had offered up this idea of a bearded man in the sky or an all-powerful being or something that exists outside of space-time or all these things, if there hadn't been that concept, do you think you would in any way be arguing that a natural process should be called a God or referred to as a God in that sense?
Do I believe that I would have come up with that, or would it have would it have happened at any point in time?
Either, I guess.
I may not have understood the question.
Either, I guess, because my point was this. It seems like you are desperately trying to find a use for the God concept. Like you think there's value in the God concept, and so you're looking for a place to put it, and you've decided that the life cycle is the best place to put it.
I wonder if I can word this properly. I believe that science could actually be a way to branch out and create another religion. That's another way that's essentially what I think could happen.
Okay. Now we're on a completely different topic.
A little bit.
Yeah, I don't care about religion, and I don't deny that you could create a religion from almost anything. I could create a religion from a rubber band trick or from a scientific finding. You could create a religion out of football. I'm not concerned about religion. You're saying you're calling in to defend a God concept, which isn't religion. It's a statement about something that you believe is true. And so if all you're saying is, I look at the life cycle and it's true, and I'm going to call it God, and I don't mean this offensively, then we've just wasted 20 minutes.
All right. Well, this is why I wanted to ask a question. This is why I wanted to ask a question earlier.
Okay.
This is why I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask what. Sorry, this goes back to when I asked what your ideal personification of God would be. I wanted to see and I know you said that I essentially don't have one at this moment. Well,
I try not to have a set one so that mine might not match the person's. However, in much the same way that somebody calls in and says, I think God is the universe. Well, thanks for sharing, but you've offered us absolutely nothing that's edifying. It doesn't tie to theology. It doesn't tie to any classical definitions of God. It's functionally identical to this bottle of Coke Zero is God, or the life cycle is God. All of those things are roughly equivalent to me. You're taking something that we agree is real, and then taking the God label, which we don't agree points to something real, and just putting it co-equal to the thing that's real. What does it add? What does it get us? What's the justification for it? I don't know why we would call the life cycle God.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this: does a God have to fall into? Is it required for a God to fall into what the prior theologies and set religions have, established? Is it necessary for that?
Not necessarily, but if you append it onto a concept that's already established in and of itself, it's not adding anything to that concept, nor is it furthering our understanding of the reality around us. You're just appending it onto something else. Like, it's not just when people say that God is the universe, people will also say, well, God is love. And some people will actually mean that, like the connections that we feel towards each other and our ability to empathize with others, well, that's God. That feeling that you get, that's God. And it's like, well, that's not really explaining anything, that you're just kind of tacking on a term and kind of muddying things up when we kind of have terms already established for that. It's not really doing much.
It doesn't have to conform to any particular religion's specific notion of a God or any individual's specific notion of God, but there's some set of minimal criteria that through if nothing else, in tradition and common practice, that have established some sort of bare minimum set of qualifications for God. I would think that if you said there was a God that wasn't actually a thinking agent, let me try this in a slightly different way. Peanut butter.
Sure.
When you think of peanut butter, you have something that comes to mind. Now, yours may be chunky, it may be smooth, it may be more oily, it may be, the chemical constituency may be different. But at the end of the day, if I said, this coffee cup is real and I'm going to make it co-equal with peanut butter, you would look at me rather strangely, I would think. I'm holding this in my hand, which we both agree is a coffee cup, and I'm going to call it peanut butter.
Right.
I would think so that's a problem. And so it could be that I'm correct, that there's a really good reason we should all look at this coffee cup and call it peanut butter. But I have to actually make that case. I have to show what adding that label to coffee cup does that justifies me using it. And I don't see that you've even gotten anywhere in the neighborhood of that for life cycle and God. You'd need some...
Okay, well, that's essentially what I am trying to do. I know I did not express it properly. I'm not a very good public speaker.
Well, what I'd recommend...
Watching this online.
What I'd recommend is put some more thought into it. And if you come up with a better way, by all means, call back and explain it. Somebody else may be here. Somebody else may be able to I don't know, guide you in a way where it makes sense to all of us. But as it stands right now, I don't see any functional difference between saying the universe is God or God is love or this coffee cup is peanut butter. I'm not saying that a God has to be, identical to somebody's particular notion of Yahweh. But if you're not talking about a thinking agent, if you're not talking about, and wouldn't even necessarily have to be the creator of the universe. I'm fine with pantheons of gods that, but there seems to be some bare minimum there. And I don't see it in a life cycle.
What I am saying, what I'm trying to do was essentially convey God in a way that you did describe, but I wanted to convey in a way that actually could be proven through natural justifiable phenomena that actually does happen in our world, stuff that we can perceive.
You're right. It sounds like you're saying that I was right when it seems that you are looking for a way to keep the God label in the absence of any sort of demonstration of any traditional notions of God. And that to me is worrying, because it means that you see some value in that label that is worth preserving. And yet when asked what value that label is adding to the life cycle, you don't seem to have an answer.
Yeah,
Well,
but even in your
I suppose I could.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
But even in your explanation, it's saying that you know, were trying to come up with a concept of God that could be proven. It's not at all. You'll just be looking at the same science that establishes that this is the life cycle, and these are the pieces and components of that life cycle. It has nothing to do with this term you've kind of tossed onto it.
Right. What you said before about putting a label on it, putting some meaning behind the label of God, or essentially, putting some. What was it that you said? Putting some what on it?
It seems that you think there's some value in the label that you want to preserve, and so you're looking for something true that you can apply the label to, rather than trying to find out if what the label points to is actually true.
Right, and you're correct. I was putting some value to it because, as I said, this is a concept that could be perceived, and I have chosen to do that. Other people might not. So, and that's basically what I was trying to put out there. But yes, this label does have some value, and I wanted to attribute my own level of value to it. If you don't see that value, that's fine. It's fine. I just wanted to put a theory out there.
I don't, but I'm aware that there are people who do, and many of the things that they seem to value about the label, I think, can be found in a truthful sense elsewhere.
Sure.
If you value it because of a sense of fairness and justice, first of all, there's no reason to think the universe gives a damn about fairness or justice, but there are people who do. And as I pointed out last Monday in the discussion, it's up to us, as far as I can tell. If you want the world to be fair or just, it's up to us to do that. And it is a kind of lazy cop-out to think that there's some kind of cosmic justice or God who's going to impose justice. And if that's where the value of the label comes from...
Oh, no.
I'm not saying...
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm not saying that's your thing. I'm just saying that this is one of many reasons why people value the label and their concept of a God. It may not be yours, but think on it and call back sometime and talk about what value you see in it and why you're trying to preserve this label. And by the way, I'm not, theists aren't the only one that do this. Sam Harris and I are pretty friendly, and I think that he's trying to preserve the word
I got that.
spirituality. And I think it's a garbage term. But
That's interesting.
Anyway, we appreciate the call, Isaiah. Yes. You take care and let us know, think on it, get back to us.
Sure. Have a good one.
All right.
Yeah, the word spirituality to me is pretty meaningless. When people talk about spiritual experiences or spirituality, the word is used in so many different ways to point to so many different things that I essentially think it's a nonsense term. Right.
It's hard to kind of gauge where it's coming from, because just like some of the God concept is for people, it can mean so many different things, and it's better to just ask the person what they actually mean by that and have them explain that and start there versus starting with the word spirituality, in my opinion. But in any case, on to more callers.
Yep. We've got David in Coventry. Thanks for waiting.
Hi, how are you?
Not too bad.
Well, how are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay or no?
I can hear you.
You're good. You're good.
Good. All right. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited. So I guess I want to start by sharing my story a little bit. Similar to yours, Matt. And what's your co-host's name?
Oh, I'm Phil.
Phil. Hey, Phil. I'm Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Dave's not here.
So basically, my story with faith, 9 years old, I saw my dad change. He cheated on my mom when I was 1, and he started to change in life, and he really started to put us first and stuff like that. So I'm like, wow, because I knew that he started going to church. I'm like, something's up with this. And so anyway, around 9 years old, I was at church. I looked up to the front. There was a woman who was like praising God. It seemed genuine. So my 9-year-old little boy mind said, hey, I'm going for this. My dad, I love him. And so that's sort of how that all began. And it was pretty unique. I don't understand much about it, but I actually fell on the ground and all that stuff that you might hear in some churches.
Sure.
Anyway, fast forward a little bit, I just sort of, when I was 12 or 13, I had an experience where I just prayed, God, help me understand this Bible because I don't get it. and I started to understand it. And then after that, I read a word about encouragement. Anytime I'd see the word encouragement, I'd be like, oh, I think that might be my spiritual gift. Anyway, fast forward 17 years old, I get very sick. And I ended up going to the Children's Hospital with basically an encephalopathy, some type of issue with my brain. And it was very confusing. And during that time, so much of what I thought was true, a couple months later when I got better, wasn't even true. Like I was sort of like a psychosis, but actually neurological issues. And so I turned 18 all in that area, that time. I was like, well, how do I know if my belief in Jesus is true if all this other stuff seemed true and isn't? It really threw me off for years. And so from 18 to 31, I studied, all these different things. And over, I found that the Christian faith very easily knocked down the other beliefs. But then after all that searching, this one thing popped in my head, which is, I can't remember what it was. Shoot. Anyway, it was so critical that I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, so basically, I'm very convinced of I believe that Jesus' story is very accurate, but even if, we say that is and all this stuff, we really can't determine that, this. Anyway, I realized that based on logic, I can't prove that there's a God.
And I don't want to get hung up on the word prove, but basically, are you saying that the evidence can't justify belief?
Yes, exactly.
Then why would anybody believe something while they simultaneously acknowledge that there's insufficient evidence to justify belief?
Oh, well, there isn't there's sufficient evidence to justify believing that it's probably true or might be true, and then you have up there, but there's not sufficient evidence to actually know intellectually, and I don't believe there is. Let me just finish a couple things. So anyway, after I determined that logic can't win out because there's I can't believe I forgot it. I'm sorry. There was a logic block, and I'm like, oh, no, I can't. So I went through this crisis. I'm like, I was like, oh, finally I'm going to have a good Easter where I'm not doubting. But then this thing come up, and I can't remember what it is. But anyway, I go to church anyway, because what am I going to do? It's Easter.
Sleep.
And wasn't quite ready to do that yet. So anyway, I went to Easter, and I'm like, oh, geez, I don't know if it's true or not. I just couldn't be in the moment. When I'm driving out, there's this song from Need to Breathe, great band, and it talks about basically just focusing on Jesus, because based on logic, I believe that the historicity of Jesus was still pretty solid on my mind. So I'm like, I'm going to forget about God, whether he might be an alien, it might be not the God that's all-powerful like I believe in, because I remember now, how could God create something out of nothing? And so that's sort of where I was. I was very devastated, but I just focused on Jesus. And wow, it was amazing.
That's called self-deception. That's called self-deception. When you set aside logic, because when you got to the point where, oh, this is beyond logic or logic can't address this, the only way for you to reach that conclusion is to use logic. And so you've already put yourself in a contradictory position where you are using logic to conclude that logic isn't sufficient. And yet when it comes to outside of a reasoned argument supported by evidence, how could I possibly believe this? If you go down the road of just focus on Jesus, that is active self-deception. It is, I'm going to set aside logical reasoning and I'm just going to focus on this. And it's common and I mean, I'm sure we all do it about something. It's actually what Blaise Pascal was arguing for with Pascal's wager, which is he agreed with me, or I guess I should say I agree with him since he's dead, that belief isn't subject to choice. Like, you don't choose what you believe. But what Blaise said was that if you find that you cannot believe and you do not believe, then you should act as if you believe in the hopes that someday you will. That is active self-deception. And what he's basically saying is, turn your eyes upon Jesus, set aside these rational foundations, keep living as if you believe, and eventually you will believe. That is the very definition of self-deception.
And even using the historicity of Jesus, because when Tracy and I were last on, that subject also came up.
Yeah.
And even though currently right now that's where many historians in the field, that's where they lay at this point in time, even though there are some arguments for and against, blah, blah, blah. But even so, that doesn't, that's only talking about the individual. That has nothing to do with anything divine or anything beyond an individual like, you and I sitting here.
I could grant you that Jesus absolutely existed, and that still doesn't get us anywhere near whether or not we have an accurate record of what he said or did. And even if we granted that we had a pretty good, accurate record of what he said, that doesn't mean that we have good reason to believe that he performed miracles or that he was divine or that he rose from the dead or any of those things. So it's kind of an irrelevant point, much in the way when you talked about the change in your dad, he was starting to go to church. Well, that doesn't mean that there was a God that changed your dad. And in fact, we already have a good understanding that if people are part of a community and that community advocates for particular social mores, that the people are more likely to do that. Changes can come from going to church, irrespective of whether or not there's a God or the foundational theology is true. Just like changes can come from coming down to the Atheist Community of Austin and interacting with people. You are now part of a group, and that comes with responsibilities. And if you want to be successfully part of that group, your behavior must conform. It has nothing to do with...
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, you've only said that your possibility is a possibility. My view is just as equally valid.
No. First of all, I didn't say anything about possibility being a possibility, but just because...
The possibility that God worked in my dad's life, just as it's a possibility.
I did not say that was possible. I did not say that was possible. I definitely did not say that was possible, because possibility must be demonstrated. I am not convinced that a God worked something in your life. I can't prove that it didn't happen, but that does not mean it's possible, nor am I saying it's possible. You have to demonstrate that it's possible.
Okay, so I'm going to continue on.
Because that's a good response to a rebuttal, is just to continue on.
No, because I have a lot to say. First of all, you said that belief leads to belief, in the sense of that what Pascal said, I'll believe, and someday I'll believe.
No, what I said was that Pascal suggests you should act as if you believe in the hopes that someday you do believe. Pretend to believe can lead to belief, not belief leads to belief.
No, but pretending to believe, what is pretending to believe?
That means you act as if you believe it.
No, believing is the act of having faith, is it not?
No, belief is the position of being convinced that a proposition is likely true. But you can act as if you believe, even if you don't believe.
Absolutely, and that's called faith. And actually, the word believe can be viewed in a different view, but that's semantics. You're right. So I'll read a verse, and I know it doesn't matter to you, but
of course it doesn't matter. Should I quote Lord of the Rings when you're done?
Let's say it needs to demonstrate that it does matter first before.
Why do you think that the Bible is not true? You mentioned once unjust laws.
So where did you get the idea that I think the Bible is not true?
Because you just said that. Well, you may have not said that it's not true. But
exactly. I may not have said that, because certainly there are some things in there that I'm convinced are true. There are other things that I am not convinced are true. And there are things that I'm convinced are not true. It's 66 books written by a bunch of different authors, depending on which version of the Bible you want to go with. It would be ridiculous for somebody to just say the Bible's not true. They would have to give additional context in what they're actually saying. So I am not convinced that anything supernatural is real. And so the Bible's supernatural claims are immediately in the not proven category.
Okay. So, but why does not proven? Okay, first of all, I'm confident and I don't really care. But you mentioned, so first of all, the Bible says very
Hang
clearly
on.
that
You say you're confident and you don't really care. I'd like for you to finish that thought. You don't care?
I really don't. I guess I believe logic is what's given is enough to be a signpost to look for yourself about Jesus Christ. And
I think you're avoiding my question.
What's your question?
You said that you don't care, and I want to know about what and why.
Because I'm living by faith. That's more than enough for me.
Okay.
Do you think that faith is a good way to reach accurate models of reality?
Actually, yes, based on Scripture, and I found it to be true.
Whoa. You don't just get to assume based on Scripture. Can you reach false conclusions based on faith?
Here's the deal.
That's a yes or no?
Yes.
All this, I'm answering the question.
I bet you're not, but go ahead.
Hypothetically, I don't answer the question straight up. It's answered through a line of maybe not the way most people do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I'm going to ask again. Can you reach false positions based on faith?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now let me ask a follow-up. Can you reach true positions based on faith?
Absolutely.
Cool. Now, let's say I've reached a position based on faith. How do I demonstrate whether or not it's true or false?
Demonstrate to another person, you don't.
No. That's okay. So there are things. Oh boy.
No. Can I say something?
No. No.
Okay.
You can reach true positions and false positions based on faith. If somebody's reached a position and they say that it's based on faith, how can one tell whether or not they've reached a true position?
How could one, as in someone other than me?
Yes, one, in the universe one, anyone tell. Phil here has reached two positions based on faith. One of them, well, actually, we'll just go with Phil has reached a position based on faith. How do I tell whether or not it's true? And how does Phil tell whether or not it's true if it's based on faith?
It's just like any scientific principle of...
The fuck it is.
Really?
Thank you.
It is. You just acknowledged that faith can lead you to true positions and false positions, and I'm asking, how do you tell the difference if it's based on faith? Because that is an admission that faith is an unreliable methodology for reaching the truth. You have to have some way. You have to have some way beyond faith to show that your position is true or not. That is nothing at all like science.
And if that's the case, why don't you just use that method in the first place to determine that it's true versus justifying it with faith?
Exactly.
Say that again?
I said, if that is the case, if you were, as you were just about to say that, it's started with the scientific type of method. If that's the case, if that's how you tell, if I, make a claim that's based on faith that X is true, but you have to use a scientific method to determine whether it is true, why not start there in the first place, rather than saying that it's based on faith at all?
Yeah, faith is the excuse people give when they don't have a good reason. Because if you ask them why they believe something and they have a good reason, they give the good reason.
Right.
I have an excellent reason.
Okay.
The Bible gives the hypothesis of how to know if God is true. Do you know what it is?
I know many assertions about this. There are views in which if you reach out to God, then God will reveal himself to you. Is that what you're getting at? Or is it more about you shall know them by their works?
No, I'll read the verse, even though I know it's
irrelevant.
To know what the Christian view is, and you already know you.
Exactly. And you know what else I know? I know that we were having this conversation, and you claim that you have good reason to believe something based on faith. And what is your good reason based on?
I have good reason to believe in something based on faith.
You did. You said it was the Bible, which is why you're going to the Bible.
Excuse me. I was talking.
I don't give a rat's ass if you were talking. You're done talking. How you like them apples? Because if you want to acknowledge that faith can lead you to both true positions and false positions, then we're in agreement. But you have to be able to demonstrate why one should use faith to reach a position. It needs to demonstrate some efficacy. It needs to demonstrate some reliability. If you just go to the Bible and say, oh, the Bible says if you do this, God will reveal himself, or whatever it was you were going to get to, that is no longer faith. That is now a methodology. Mm-hmm. If you quote me, I have the book of Eric here. If the book of Eric says in it that if you want to see God, say, God is a poop head 3 times live on the air, and God will appear to you in the studio. God is a poop head. God is a poop head. God is a poop head. It didn't happen. Does that mean there's not a God? I see you, but you're not God. Does that mean there's not a God? No. There's no way to show that that's falsified, that is a false position, because all you have to do is come back and say, well, Matt, you weren't serious. You didn't do it with the proper heart. And then all you're doing is saying, I cannot be wrong, so you must have done something wrong. And the truth is, as Phil and I both pointed out, if you had a reliable method to support your beliefs, which you already acknowledge you don't when you threw logic out the window and decided to just engage in self-deception, if you had a good method, you would cite that method, which is why at no point in the history of scientific study has somebody come forward and says, I'm doing science and I take it on faith that I'm right. There's no Nobel Prize for faith. Not even the Templeton Foundation, which is desperate to prove there's a God, is just going to take faith as the foundation for a study's results. You have deceived yourself not only with respect to Jesus, but with respect to reason and science. And no, they're not anything the fuck alike at all. All right, so that was an easy one. But Luke in St. Louis, thanks for wading through that. Hopefully, we're not going to get into faith.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Phil.
Hi.
Hey.
Well, not necessarily faith, but I just wanted to call in because I'm a pastor's son. Mm-hmm. My dad is actually the pastor of the First Church of God in West Felton, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
And I've been kind of a struggling believer after watching your show. And I just wanted to share possible answered prayer with you to get your take on it.
Yeah, because it says here in the notes that you think God's real because he answered your prayers. So we would love to hear what prayers were answered and how you know it was God.
Well, I was going through a period of struggling with my faith. So I actually quit going to church for a while. And I still don't go to church now, but this was early 2017, and my grandma had to go to the doctor, and she had low blood sugar, so the doctor said she couldn't drive anymore. And so she asked me to take her to church. So I pretty much said, okay, I'll take you to church, but I don't want to have to go there because to me, going to church once is enough to find out what it's like. And as a pastor's kid, I've already been there for hundreds and hundreds of times. I've heard the sermons, I've heard the songs, I read the whole Bible. And so I said, I'll take you over there, Grandma, but I'll just pick you up afterwards. So I did. And then I decided to go eat at McDonald's for breakfast. And so I was sitting out in the car, and I decided to turn on the radio. And it was kind of cold that day, and the car just totally ran out of battery power, and it died. So I thought, oh, great. I forgot my cell phone, so I can't call anybody. And all the automotive shops are closed around me. Mm-hmm. The Target nearby, this was on, I forgot to say, this was on Lindbergh Boulevard in North St. Louis.
Yeah, I used to live near there.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
That's neat.
It's not a sign from God. I've lived lots of places.
Cool story, bro.
So anyway, I was sitting out in the parking lot, and I decided maybe the sun will warm up the battery enough so the car will start. So I open the hood, and I wait there for maybe half an hour, and I try to start the car, and it still doesn't work. So then I'm really stuck, and I don't know how I'm going to get back home at this point. So
And pick
all
up
of a
your
sudden-
grandma.
Right.
Yeah, I had to pick her up too from church, but all of a sudden, a car pulls up next to mine, and a man gets out of the car, and I just would like to say that I'd say 95% of the time in St. Louis, if somebody talks to me, it's always to ask me for something, like ask me for money or ask me for a ride. So I didn't know what to expect. But the man got out of the car, and he asked me if something was wrong with the car, and I said, yeah, my battery died, I'm kind of stuck here. And so he gets these jumper cables out of his car, and he helps me to restart my car. But then what he said before he left always stuck with me, because I said, I wish I had something to give you, but I have nothing to give except my thanks. And he said, there's no need to thank me. This is your blessing from God. And the reason that stuck with me so much was because earlier that week, I had prayed that God would show me some sort of sign or evidence or proof that I was praying to the real God. And so I couldn't dismiss that as an answer to prayer. And so though I struggle with my faith, it's just things like this that kind of reinforce my beliefs that I've grown up with. And I guess I'd just like to see what your take is on it. Like, how would you have looked at this situation back when you still were a Christian compared to now?
Like on that side, like I can see, especially when I was more, I mean, by the time I got out of my religion, I didn't have a car while I was in that time. So I'm not sure exactly, but I can see myself kind of justifying in my mind that this was, divine intervention. But now looking and seeing, the works that people can do for one another and the way that we empathize with others, the way that we can come to the assistance of another and be a community. What I see from that type of act there, especially if you're there stranded, you have your car hood open, stuff like that, it signals to someone else that it was in a position that they were able to help, to actually stop and say, hey, do you need help? And so I look at that as just an awesome human being compassionate and seeing someone else that may be in need and actually taking time and lending that assistance. But it has nothing to do necessarily with their belief in a deity or your belief in one, because I can see that type of empathy and that type of compassion happening all around us here in this building, here at our volunteer events. That's something that's not necessarily unique.
Not only not unique, there's absolutely nothing remarkable about this scenario at all. It was cold. Your hood was up. Of course, some nice person might stop to see if you needed some assistance.
Sure.
I've done it as both a believer and as a non-believer. At the end, when he says you don't have to give him anything, that's what almost any decent person who's willing to stop is going to say, because they didn't stop in the hopes that you'd have $20 for them.
Right. They
saw somebody out there in need and they were being a decent person. The fact that he calls it your blessing from God just tells you that he's a believer. If it had been me that had stopped and got your car started for you, and you said, I wish I had something to give you, I would have said something like, you don't need to give me anything. I just want to make sure that you get out of here safely.
Yeah, have a safe trip home.
At the end of the day, though, let's assume that this was incredibly rare. Like, let's say we lived in in a movie like Escape from New York, where nobody's going to stop and help anybody. And you're stuck, and somebody helps you, and at the end of it, they tell you that this is your blessing from God, and you had been praying for a blessing from God. Does that mean it was actually a blessing from God? Or did you just run into the one of the majority of, in this world, the majority of people believe in a God. The majority of people are likely, even those who aren't particularly religious, will use language like that because it's cultural to do so. Phil and I were at a burger joint yesterday, and a woman who's clearly an atheist in a not completely sarcastic sense, basically shook Phil's hand and said, well, God bless you for doing the stuff, because that's the language that's ingrained in us. So it may be that the person believed in God. It's maybe that they didn't. Maybe they probably did, given the odds. But I don't see how you can say, okay, I was desperate for a sign from God, and what he gave me was something that happens every day that is wholly unremarkable, and I'm just going to conclude that that's God giving me a sign. What kind of God, by the way, has you in a bad place asking for a sign and then decides, in a week or so, I'll stall his car and have somebody help him out? Because at a minimum, if we're going to talk about a God, a wise God, somebody that understands reason, that God would have to know that there's not sufficient evidence to warrant a connection between I said a prayer and this happened to show that God was real. So if God wants to demonstrate that he's actually real, he would have to do so in a way that goes beyond, hey, this is an incredibly probable set of circumstances. It's like the people who pray to find their keys, and then they search the whole house and they find their keys and they give credit to God. Well, if you hadn't prayed to God and you search the whole house, you're still going to find your keys. Mm-hmm. And you always find it in the last place you look, because that's when you stop looking. This is all of this is wholly unremarkable. Now, you asked how I would view this when I was still a believer. And so the answer is, I probably would have reached the same conclusion you did at some point.
Yeah.
But since then, I've gotten to understand that conclusion isn't justified. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe there is a God, and this God conspired to have your car break down just so that he could send somebody to do something nice for you. I don't know that didn't. I can't show that didn't happen. But the problem is nobody can show that that's what did happen. And given that situation, it's unreasonable to conclude that that's the best explanation or even the correct one.
And even if it did happen, hopefully it would happen outside of somewhere better than a Mickey D's, of all places to place it. But,
I mean, God does a really, seemingly does a great job of helping people find their car keys or making sure that somebody gets a jump start in the car, and yet, doesn't heal amputees or kids with cancer.
Yeah, I guess my only response to that would be when you were talking about how rare it would be for something to happen, because for him to say, this is your blessing from God, that was the only time in my life I remember someone saying that to me.
Oh, come on now. You're a preacher's kid, and nobody else had ever said this is your blessing from God in your entire life.
Or have a blessed day, or some type of usual phrase that you get from people. What is it? Some people in my family say, I'm passing on the blessings.
Yeah,
just passing on the blessings.
Now, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just I just think you're kind of perhaps overemphasizing this. But you get to decide how you're going to treat all this. I just find it strange that nobody had ever said anything like that to you after having done something nice. Had nobody ever done anything nice to you before?
Well, they have, but they didn't state it exactly like he said, like, this is your specific blessing from God, almost like it was a response to the prayer earlier that week.
Okay. Or is it more possible that you were really looking for a response, and you looked at this situation and really grafted it on as a response to the prayer that you did? If you hadn't made that prayer and the same type of thing occurred where your car broke down and he said that, would you have attributed the same significance as what you're doing now?
Probably not.
Well, here's a question. If you had jumper cables in your car and you had stopped to help somebody, and at the end they had said, hey, wish I had something to give you, but I don't, what would you have said?
I probably just would have said, oh, you're welcome. You don't have to give me anything.
Okay.
But these things happen to me, like, I just wonder how unlikely something would have to be before you would think there was more to the story, just like...
The likelihood is irrelevant. The likelihood is irrelevant. There has to be a demonstrated connection. So let's say I win the lottery 2 weeks in a row after praying because I'm financially destitute, and I win the lottery and that's $400 and some odd million, and then I take another dollar out of that and I put it in and I win the next week too. That's incredibly unlikely. And yet, that does not mean that it was an answer to prayer. You have to actually demonstrate that it is, because in order to figure out a causal connection between an event and what may have been responsible for it, you have to put together a list of candidate explanations of things that are likely to be the case. And you also have to probably leave a question mark because there may be other explanations that you don't know about. And then you have to have a way to assess, of those candidate explanations, which ones are more probable than another. In the case of a God, we have no way to assess whether or not it's possible or probable or how probable it is. So it ends up effectively being a zero. That doesn't mean that God didn't do it. It just means that we cannot assess the likelihood. And so by definition, every other natural explanation, no matter how unlikely, is, for all intents and purposes, more probable than a supernatural one, because we have no way to demonstrate that. So if I flip a coin and it comes up heads 35 times in a row, well, was that just luck? Because we know that that's possible, that it can happen. Was it a God trying to give me a message? Why can't God do a better job of giving a message that can't be looked at as, this is incredibly improbable, but not necessarily supernatural? This is how we assess this. Now, that doesn't mean that you are in a position where you should just dismiss the supernatural. The point is, you cannot use the supernatural as an explanation until such time as we have reason to believe that the supernatural is possible, probable, and likely. And you have to have some way of kind of quantifying that.
Okay. Just the other thing I want to speak on is, you said in the past that you don't give significance to number combinations. And like you were saying about unlikely events, for example, once I went to the gas station and my odometer read 111.1 miles. And I noticed this, and when I went to the gas station, I saw someone in there I hadn't seen in 15 years. So would you just say...
Why wouldn't your odometer read 1515 then?
People give significance to the number 1111. I don't know what it is about that number.
But how many times does that number appear on someone's odometer and nothing of significance actually occurs afterwards? Like fairly a lot, I would say.
I think part of it is that my attention was drawn to it. Like if it was some other number, I may not have even looked at it.
Sure.
Okay.
So you see somebody that you haven't seen in 15 years and your odometer reads 37982 and you don't pay any attention. You see somebody you haven't seen in 15 years and your odometer reads 111.1 and you're like, wow, that's interesting. That's weird. But as Phil was pointing out, how many times are car odometers going to read 111.1 and nothing significant happens?
I don't know. That's just the thing.
Almost every time.
Yeah.
Almost every time.
Millions of cars out there.
And the alternative is, how often has something significant happen and there's a number on your odometer that you wouldn't have attributed any significance to? And by the way, this is, I kid you not, the very first time in my life anyone has ever said that 111.1 has any sort of significance.
Well, 1111 is what a lot of people give significance to. But I was just...
Literally, I've never heard anybody suggest that 1111 has significance.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
I might have missed out. Huh. But even if everybody were running around saying 1111 is significant, that doesn't make it so.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to hear your opinion on it, but thanks for talking to me.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it. We're gonna wrap up. If you're still on the line, though, we're gonna take some after show calls. But and I appreciate those people waiting. So Jerome, Q, and Marcos, we're gonna get to you right as soon as that we wrap this up. Yeah. Thanks to everybody who showed up on the other side of the glass and the people on the other side of that wall who make the show happen. They'll throw their names up in a minute. And to Phil for being patient and the world's greatest volunteer.
Woo, thanks. It was an awesome show. Very interesting.
And to Eric for leaving the Book of Eric.
The Book of Eric here. Oh, dear.